Hey everybody, Pivot here. Today I'm going to go over my question and answer videos. And I'm probably going to do it in a series of videos. I want to give you all really in-depth, well thought out answers. So I don't want to skim over anything. So I'm probably going to break this down into a series of question and answer videos. So here is part one. All right, guys, I got my computer set up just outside frame, and I've gone through all of my individual videos as well as the community tab page where I asked you guys to ask me your questions. So I've got them all laid out on my computer. I have them categorized in different categories. Some fit certain categories better than others, but I've done my best to kind of put them into categories. So I'm going to try and break the videos down into groupings of like questions. So this is part one, and I think I'm going to talk about probably electronics and logistics and maybe gear if we have enough time. So let's get into it. Let's talk electronics first. So in no particular order, here are the electronic related type questions. So number one, what phone plan did I use or would suggest as a Canadian? What did I do for a phone plan? Did I keep my Canadian coverage or did I get an American SIM card? I have a Canadian cell phone plan through Rogers. So what I did was I looked into what Rogers had in terms of adding on for American coverage. I found for myself that this was actually the best option because I thought I would likely be coming back and forth to the US over the next couple years. So what I chose to do was to upgrade my current Canadian plan to include all American coverage. So that means I had coverage through phone, texting, and I had unlimited data for internet. So I didn't have to worry about it at all. Also, Rogers has plans or contracts with all of the major US providers. So I was able to seamlessly flip between any provider at any given time. So I could use AT&T, I could use Sprint, I could use Verizon. I would typically allow my phone to pick the best coverage in that specific area. But if I wanted to, I could actually go in and force it to pick, say, Sprint over AT&T. Typically, my phone automatically always chose AT&T, and out of everywhere that I hiked, including Washington, I had coverage most of the time. There wasn't very many areas or spots or days where I didn't have full coverage or at least some coverage. So I was very happy with keeping my Canadian plan. And yes, I pay a little bit more a month for that. But for me, I thought that that was the best option, given that I still plan to kind of travel back and forth over the next couple of years. It's my understanding that all of the top tier Canadian providers such as Rogers, Bell, TELUS, they all have this capability of changing your plan to include an American coverage. What I discovered from a lot of other Canadians is that if you are on the second tier, such as like Fido, I don't even know what some of the other ones are, but the tiers that are under the main brand, those ones don't offer the upgrade coverage. So if you are not with one of the top tier major providers, you may have to go with getting an American SIM card. Again, I just thought that that was just one extra thing that I would have to do once I got there that I didn't want to have to worry about. I didn't want to have to worry about whether my phone was actually going to work or not. So I just upgraded my coverage and kept my Canadian plan, and it worked out really well for me. When Leonie or Desert Moon and I hooked up, she was on, oh gosh, I think it was T-Mobile for her coverage in the States. And 9 times out of 10, she would have no service and I would. It was very frustrating for her. And So being two Canadians, it would have been better if she had been able to just upgrade her own plan instead of getting a T-Mobile plan. If you do get an American SIM card as a Canadian, don't go with T-Mobile. It wasn't good. And it wasn't just in Washington that it wasn't good. She had issues in NorCal as well, and from what she told me, all throughout the desert. So do your research if you're going to go with an American SIM card and get a high quality coverage provider. Okay, so the next question is, what camera did I use to video all of my footage? And was stabilization part of the camera, or did I do that in the editing process? So I used the DJI Osmo. It's the second version, which has the zoom. The original version was the DJI Osmo Pocket camera. I think they just call it DJI Pocket now. I don't know. But look it up. That's the camera that I used. I have been using this camera for 4+ years now, and I absolutely love it. It has an internal battery, so I just recharged it every night. I never went a day running out of complete battery. By the end of the day, I would usually have anywhere from 30 to 50% battery left, and I've videoed quite a bit. So yeah, absolutely love it. Because it has an internal battery pack, I didn't have to carry any additional batteries, therefore didn't have that extra weight. And it only took, when I charge my camera, it only takes about 5% of my battery pack to charge, which is pretty darn good. GoPro batteries and other camera batteries that are external take up way more to recharge. So I particularly loved my little DJI Osmo camera. The stabilization is actually part of it. The camera head itself has an internal gimbal, so it does all the stabilization as I'm filming. I don't have to do any editing for that at all. It's all part of the actual camera itself. It also flips from selfie mode to outside mode with a push of a button. It takes video or pictures, and I think, as you can tell with my videos, the quality of it was pretty darn good. So I highly recommend this camera if you're looking for something that's not cumbersome or very heavy. Okay, so what editing software did I use to edit my videos? I used iMovie. I had a little SD card reader that I would plug into my iPhone. I would upload all my videos into my iPhone and then just use iMovie to edit. And I found that that worked quite well for me. My only issue with that was not the software itself. It was that I just never seemed to be in a space where I had enough Wi-Fi or strong enough dedicated Wi-Fi to actually upload the videos. So that was my biggest issue, and why in the end I just decided to wait until I was done, because I couldn't spend 24 hours waiting for a 120-minute video to load. But as for the iMovie itself, I've been using iMovie for 4 years and I enjoy it. The phone is pretty limited in what it can do, but I just wanted to make basic videos anyway. So yeah, I was very happy with that. On average, how long did it take to edit my daily videos? So that, there's two answers to that. On trail, it took a long time because I couldn't focus on it. There was other things that I needed to do, other things that I wanted to do. I didn't really want to be sitting down and tuning out everybody and not interacting with my trail families just to edit. So when I did do that, it seemed to take a really long time. When I was editing when I took my time off or even at home, I would say I would spend anywhere from an hour to upwards of 3 hours editing. It just really depended on what kind of footage I had that day, what I needed to edit out. If I was having a really bad day, especially in the desert, I had a tendency to get out my frustrations by using the camera. So I would have to edit out a lot of things I was saying that were just for me to get off my chest. I never ever really meant to include that footage and put it out into the world. So there was a lot of editing that I had to do to take out my own frustrations and things that I, again, never intended to actually put out there. But later on, when things were better and I was really happy, quite a bit less editing because I wasn't taking out a lot of my own stuff. So I would say average anywhere from an hour to 3 hours per video. How did you keep up with your mileage so accurately at the beginning of every video? Besides Far Out, what system did I use to keep track? So I had a spreadsheet on my phone. I had a little Excel spreadsheet. Let me pull it up here so I can tell you accurately what I was doing. So because I have an iPhone, I used numbers, and I created a spreadsheet called PCT stats. And so I would have the day, so like day 1, which was April 6th, so I'd have the day and the date. And then I had my starting mile and my ending mile for the day, total daily miles, and then total combined miles. In the beginning, I was also kind of tracking off PCT trail miles, and I at some point quit tracking that. But yeah, so I ended up, sorry, that was non-PCT miles. I did track my total combined. So every day I would add, like day 2, I added to day 1. I also kept track of my daily steps. But that's how I knew what day it was and kind of where I was. And especially in the end, when we were counting down the miles in Washington, I knew that based on Far Out. But mostly I was using this numbers sheet to keep track of what day it was and where I was. So yeah, I like that. I also kept track of, was I random camping? Did I stay in town? Did I have a shower? Did I do laundry? Near 0, all of that kind of fun stuff. How did I keep up with all my rechargeables? So I had a lot of rechargeables. So I had my phone, my camera, my headlamp, what else was there? My watch. So I started out with a 30,000 whatever megawatt. I don't even know what the number or letters behind the numbers means, but 30,000, you know what that is. And it was actually shit. It was a light battery pack, and I thought that 30,000 would last me at least 7 to 10 days. And I thought that because I had a 26-800 that lasts me, I've had it last 10 days. So, but it's significantly heavier. So I had bought this other one thinking, oh, this will be great. And it was shit. It lasted 4 days max. So I quickly swapped that back out with my 26-800, and that thing could recharge everything I needed it to do for 10 days. So I was totally comfortable going for a 7-day stretch and knew that I was not going to run out of battery juice. And I would recharge my phone and my Osmo every single night. And then I would charge my headlamp and my watch as needed. But yeah, never had a problem with it running out. I would always have I would say at least 20% battery left in it by the time we got to town. So, and you know what? It's just a no-name brand one that I got off of Amazon. And I really liked it, other than that it weighed significantly more than what most people would be willing to weigh. But I chose the weight because I knew I wouldn't have to worry about having enough juice for everything. Would I use the same camera again if I were to do a trip like this again? Yes, I would. As I said, I've been using my Osmo for 4 years now. I absolutely love it. It's perfect in almost every situation. It's small, it's light. I can just stick it in my shoulder pocket, pop it out when I need to. I love that I can flip between selfie and non-selfie seamlessly. It's such a handy little camera. Is it like feature film quality, probably not, but I don't care. I'm just videoing my videos to have fun and to have something to share with family and friends. So it's good enough for me, and I will continue to use this camera probably for the rest of time. Okay, so how is it possible to make a 20-minute video every day while on trail? Did you somehow have Wi-Fi? That sun. I can't get out of it. Okay, so I've already answered this, but the answer is no. I did not have Wi-Fi. I really struggled with that. I found that if I wasn't in somebody's home and had dedicated Wi-Fi, even a hotel Wi-Fi was never good enough for any of my videos to upload. They would just bounce. I would go to upload it and it would go 23 hours, 2 hours, 36 hours, 5 hours. Like, it just would bounce around and do nothing in the end. And that's why I ended up not putting my videos out there daily while I was on trail. Because it was just too hard to find the Wi-Fi. And let me tell you that the people that are, okay, I'm not going to say all of them, but the ones that I know of that were putting out videos every day or fairly consistently, they were sending their footage home and they had someone else do the editing and uploading for them. They weren't doing it on trail themselves, because I asked, because I'm like, how is this possible? Why am I the only one having issues? And that was the response, was they had someone at home that was doing that part for them. So I didn't do a 20-minute video every day on trail because I couldn't. So when I would stop in at somebody's house, like when we stopped in, when we stayed in Joshua Tree, instead of going out for dinner, I needed some quiet time. I was so overwhelmed by the people and the noise and everything by that point that I just needed some quiet time. So I chose to stay home instead of going out for dinner, and they graciously let me use their Wi-Fi, and I spent that evening just trying to pump out as many videos as I could just to get a little bit caught up. And then I did all up until the end of Tehachapi while I was on that month break, and then the rest I waited until I got home because I just couldn't do it on trail. Okay, so that's the end of electronics. Let's move to logistics. Okay, so there's some really good questions here. So logistics. How did I plan logistics of resupplies? So I'm gonna keep this one to basically just like, how did I resupply? And for the majority of my resupplying, I just purchased it in town. There were a couple of sections, like from Idlewild, we shipped a box forward to Cabazon because we thought it would be easier to just do that than try and resupply in Cabazon. And then in Washington, I did do an entire month's worth of resupply boxes, but for the most part, I just would calculate like where I was, like say if I was in Julian and my next stop was Idlewild, how many miles is that divided by how many miles I think I'm gonna go per day, and then that's how many days worth of food that I need. So then I would go to the grocery store and I would purchase 7 breakfasts, 7 lunches, 7 dinners, 7 snacks per, however many I needed per day. So that's typically how I managed resupply. Even in Washington, it's 500 miles. We did the math as to how far we think we were going to go to each town, how fast we thought we were going to get there. And we shipped out pre-purchased food to every single town stop in Washington. And it actually worked out really well. There was only one time that we kind of miscalculated how much food we needed. But we ended up meeting some lovely girls that were getting off trail and they gifted us their food. So, the trail provides. So, the logistics of supplies, it really you learn how to do it as you go. It's kind of stressful in the beginning, but as you get to know what you like and what you need and how far you're going to go, it actually becomes pretty simple after a while. Did I pre-package boxes and send them to myself, or did I purchase along the way? And I think I just answered this. So the majority of the time I purchased along the way. In Washington, I did send out every stop except for when we knew we were going to Leavenworth. We did resupply in Leavenworth itself, but every other stop in Washington, we sent a box. I will say, having done that, the only place I think I would have changed that might have been Trout Lake, because the general store there actually did have a pretty phenomenal resupply store. They had a ton of options and things that I was actually eating. So I was kind of sad that I shipped a box there and wasn't supporting that store, because they had a phenomenal resupply for a small store. Most of the small stores, I feel like they say they're good, but they're really not, especially when you're starting out. Like, say for instance, Mount Laguna. I struggled in Mount Laguna. That was my first resupply, and had I known the limitation of the food there, I probably either would have carried enough food to go all the way to Julian, which is 7 days, or I would have shipped a box there. I really struggled there. I found that they had very, very limited choices, and at that point, I was still incredibly picky about what I was eating. But that's one of those things that you have to learn as you go. You're gonna know what it is you like and what you don't like, and you're gonna kind of be able to tell ahead of time. If it's a small general store or a convenience store, they're not gonna have what I need. So just keep that in mind. How did I find my Seattle Trail Angel? That's a very good question. So if you don't know what that question is referring to, I had a beautiful trail angel named Rebecca who lived in the Seattle area. And I actually, because my brother drove me from Canada down to the Mexico border, we stopped in Seattle and I dropped off all of my pre-made boxes. I had a box per month for things like my contacts, my supplements, things like that. So I had boxes pre-made, but I also left a lot of just in case items with her. And so she would send them to me when I would ask her to send me stuff. But how I found her was I had seriously been wanting someone in the States that I could do this with. And I had a few people in mind, like relatives of friends that kind of live somewhere in the western part of the US. But I actually found Rebecca through one of the Facebook groups. She had actually made a post saying, hey, I am interested in helping in any way that I can. So give me a shout and let's talk. So I sent her a message and I said, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Is this something you think you can help me with? And she graciously agreed, and she was a godsend the whole entire way. I felt like she was one of my best friends and one of my biggest supporters along the way. And yeah, she was just amazing. So it doesn't hurt to scan the Facebook pages to see if anybody's offering, or to even put it out there. Join some of the Trail Angel pages and just put it out there and see if anybody be willing to be that person for you. How did I plan how far I would go before having a 0 day? So typically I would have a 0 day at every town stop. I didn't necessarily take a 0 day at every single town stop, but I kind of planned it that way. Just because usually by the time I got to town, I was ready for a full day off. Not everybody does that. Some people went 3, 4, 5 town days before they actually took a full day off. Lots of people would, Nero in and Nero out. But typically I would take a 0 at every town stop because I either needed the time or I just wanted the extra rest. That's just me. You could totally do whatever it is that you want. If you feel like you can go for a 2-week stretch without stopping, then by all means do that. But if you feel like every town stop, or once a week, now I want to clarify that with, I would do that about once a week. So for instance, in the first week you have Mount Laguna, you have Lake Morena, Mount Laguna, and then Julian. I did not Nero or zero in Morena or Mount Laguna. I took a 0 in Julian because they were only 2 and then 4 and then 7 days, right? So I wasn't ready for a 0 in Mount Laguna. So I went all the way to Julian. So it was typically a 7-day stretch, depending on how far away the next town stop was, if that makes sense. Could one always find a room in town if one needed to pivot and change plans or go into town? I never had any trouble finding a place to stay in town. And I stayed at hotels, motels. I stayed at a couple of Trail Angel places. I stayed in some campgrounds. Yeah, I personally never found an issue with finding a place to stay. And I don't know if that was just my particular circumstances or if it was part of the uniqueness of this year with everybody kind of being all over the place. I'm not really sure, but I personally never found an issue with that. How did I know what trails to exit from if I had to leave the trail quickly or unexpectedly? I would say 95% of the time that was using Far Out. I don't recall an instance where I didn't know from Far Out which trail to take to get out. But you could also, I guess, do some research about the local area if you kind of knew, if you were in town and you kind of maybe knew ahead of time that you might want a bailout point, then I think you would research local trails while you were in town so you kind of knew. But for the most part, if you zoom in on Far Out enough, you can usually find a way to get out. Did I use a map and compass or was my navigation all digital? I am a 100% digital girl. Good, bad, or otherwise. I did not carry a map and I did not carry a compass. I purchased all of the National Geographic maps and had them, but I left them with my brother at home because when I found them, I thought, well, these are heavy and I'm not likely to use them, and they were backwards. The books were actually all made in a southerly direction and I was going north. So the book would be, I'd have to go from back to front, and it was confusing, and I actually didn't find that the map was big enough to really help me in any significant way if I needed to get off trail. I just found it way easier just to use Far Out. Far Out was pretty darn good for the navigation, but again, the trail itself is so well marked that, I don't know, in my opinion, if you get lost on the PCT, like, you just weren't paying attention. But I mean, that's just my personal opinion. Sorry if you've a person who got lost and you don't feel that way, but yeah, I have pretty good internal navigation skills. So between just my own intuition and following them, Far Out and just following the trail signs, yeah, I didn't really feel the need for a map and compass. How much is a permit for a section of trail? So if you're going through the PCTA, so the Pacific Crest Trail Association, whether you get a permit for the entire trail or that 500-mile range, they kind of got two things going on there. The permits are free. From what I saw, most of the self-registration permits that you would, if you didn't have the PCTA permit, that you would have to then self-register along the way. I think they were free, but I think there are some that you do have to pay for as well. So if you're going through the PCTA, it's absolutely free. How far in advance can a person book a section? Again, if you're going through the PCTA, you have to wait until November. So November 2023, they released the permits for 2024. So they're allowed to release 50 permits per day. So they released 35 in November, and then they released the remaining 15 in January. So if you're only planning on doing a section, but you want that PCTA permit, it's the same timeline, November and or January. If you're just going to go out there and just get the local permits as you go, I don't know that you have to book them in advance. That's something that you would have to research on your own, because I had my PCTA permit, so I don't really know. Did I get travel and medical insurance? Yes, I purchased Blue Cross coverage because I didn't have a job. I wasn't on leave from a job. I didn't have any employer health or travel coverage. So I purchased medical and travel insurance through Blue Cross. I did some research and found that for what I needed, their verbiage for hiking and being in high elevation, it seemed to cover that, and it was like half the price of quite a few of the others. So yeah, Blue Cross for the win. How was customs when crossing the border before the hike? For me, it was fine. So as I mentioned, we drove. So we crossed into the US just outside of Cranbrook, and we pulled up to the customs agent. He asked us what we were doing. I was driving, so I said, well, my girlfriend and I here we're driving down to Mexico. We're going to hike the PCT. My brother in the back seat, he's just driving us there, and then he's going to come home. And he basically then said, well, you guys are kind of crazy. And we said, yeah, we are. And then he said, do you have any firearms with you? And we said, no. And he giggled and said, maybe you should. And that was it. And we drove off, and all was well. Same with returning. I didn't have any issues returning. So yeah, border crossings via driving, really well. So that leads into the next question, which is, how is the process to get the PCT Canadian border crossing permit, especially as a Canadian? So this, I have to say, this was the first year that the border crossing was actually open since 2020 because of COVID. So I don't know if my experience was because it had been closed for so long and maybe some of the agents didn't know about it, or maybe it's always been this way. I don't really know. But getting the permit was fairly easy. I just went onto the PCTA website. I filled out the form. I submitted it with all the things they require, like a copy of your passport, blah, blah. Got it returned, approved, no problem. What I did find is that form is not tailored to Canadians coming home. It is tailored to Americans and other foreigners who want to cross into Canada. So as a Canadian, some of the questions didn't really make sense. So like it would say, well, when are you departing? Well, I'm not departing because I'm a Canadian. So what am I supposed to put there, right? So I actually put not returning or not departing. I live here. So it was just kind of weird to fill out a form that clearly had nothing to do with being Canadian. And yet as a Canadian, I was still expected to have this permit to cross back in an unmanned border crossing. But what I ended up doing is, so we walked into Manning Park. So we crossed the border and walked into Manning Park. Then we drove back to Seattle. We took Woodsy with us. At the border crossing back into the US, they didn't see it. They didn't want to know, like, okay, you've been in the States for 5 months and you haven't crossed back into Canada at a real border crossing, and now you're coming back. Like, how does that work? Like, they didn't ask. They didn't care at all. Didn't want to see that permit. Nothing. Just let us go in. On the way back into Canada, because we just went to Seattle for the day, on the way back in, again, at the Canadian side, she didn't ask me to see that permit, which I thought was very strange. So she could see that I entered the States twice, but had not officially returned. And her only question was, so you drove all the way from Grand Prairie to be in Seattle for a day? And then I had to explain to her again, because I had already done so. I said, no, I was hiking the PCT. I crossed the border at Monument 78. I think that's the right monument number. Anyway, whichever one it was. And then hiked into Manning Park. And then we've driven back to Seattle because I had my stuff dropped off there. And then now we're headed back home. And she just was like, oh, okay. Didn't care to see that permit. So honestly, I don't know why one has that permit. And even Leonie had that permit. She went to Abbotsford and flew home from Abbotsford, and they didn't even want to see it. So as a Canadian, I honestly don't know why we have to even apply for and or have that permit. It seemed pretty irrelevant to anyone. Having said that, I am definitely going to be keeping that permit for the next time I fly to the States, because I don't want to get to customs and be like, oh, well, you can't enter because you never got home and like you went over your 180 days, blah, blah. And I'll be like, no, sir, that's not true. But, so I'm not quite trusting that system. And I don't really know why it exists. As a Canadian, I get it for, other nationals, but yeah, I don't know why they don't have a separate document for us. What is an ideal date for a not so rushed hiker to start? I would say, I kind of have two answers for this. I would say if you are an American and therefore you have no time limit placed on you, I would say an ideal start date would probably be sometime in March. And then you just take your sweet old time. Take your sweet time through the desert. Take your sweet time through the whole entire thing. That's ideal. Ideally, you're an American and you have all the time in the world. But yeah, I would say March to the beginning of April is probably the best time to start. If you are a Canadian or another nationality who has that time restriction placed on you, the 180 days, I would still say that if you're not like in a huge rush to be pushing out 20-mile days right away, start in March or April. If you start in May, you kind of have to be starting out at bigger miles. Not only because of the heat, but because then if you don't and you still following your 6-month timeline, you're going to be pushing winter in Washington. And I don't know, for me, that just doesn't sound fun. So I would still say the ideal start date would be kind of mid to late March to early mid-April. Last question in the logistics category is Scout and Froto or Cleef? So I don't know if I have the I don't want to say authorization, that's not the right word, but I don't know if I can truly answer this because I didn't do either. So because my brother drove us there, we stayed in a hotel in San Diego, and then he drove us to Campo, dropped us off at the border. So I didn't stay at Scout and Froto's or Cleef, but in looking at it, if I was to do it again and fly, I have two thoughts about it. Is one, I think for my own journey for this year, if I had had to fly, I probably would have just gone straight. I would have caught the shuttle and gone straight to Cleef and just stayed there. But I had witnessed that the people that stayed at Scout and Froto and then all took the shuttle together, people seem to have a really good it was a really good opportunity to make some good connections really early on. And I met a lot of people who were hiking together that were like, oh, yeah, we met at Scout and Photos. We've been hiking together since day one. And I think that if you don't stay there and or don't take the shuttle, you might be missing an opportunity to make some connections before you even hit the trail. I don't personally regret the way that I did it, but I also had Barb with me, so I didn't necessarily need that kind of connection. But if I was to do it again, I think that I probably would stay at Scout and Photos if they're still doing it, just to be able to have that pre-trail connection time. So that's electronics and logistics, and for the sake of video length, I'm going to cut the part 1 there, and I will see you again shortly for part 2, where we're going to cover food resupply and probably gear. All right, see you soon.